pick an idea, pick a problem, use some of these sprint/design thinking techniques to do competitive research, to generate ideas, use some negative brainstorming techniques. You need to take the one idea you have and expand it. So you need to be expansive right now. We want that cross-functional team involved. The engineer, designer, product manager, maybe you've got a data scientist. There are other folks sometimes on these teams. The reason you do this is you want diversity of opinion. You want more perspectives. We're not giving the designer a list of bullet points and say, hey, please come back with this prototype. We're going to go further into the design process because really we're thinking about that user experience. And everyone on the team should take ownership and generate a point of view on the user experience.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Awkward Silences. Today, we're here with Jim Morris. Jim is the founder at Product Discovery Group, and they do product coaching. And today, we'll be talking about how product teams can DIY solutions testing. So really excited to jump into this topic. I know will be interesting to a lot of our listeners. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for having me.
We got Carol here, too.
Hello, everyone. So excited to, as always, talk about product teams doing research. So can't wait to dive in.
All right. Well, let's start from the beginning. Why and when is it helpful for product teams to do their own research?
You know, it's great when you've got this idea and this problem you're solving, but at that moment you want to create that solution. It's a great time to go out and do discovery to really figure out if you've got the right solution. And so as you build those prototypes and as you define those products, getting into your market at that point so that you don't fall in love with it too fast and you don't overdo it. In this design phase is a great time as you're designing your solution to get out in the market. Get this idea for a solution and you're, as a team, coming up with, I would hopefully say, multiple solutions for this problem. You create this plan to find five or more of your target users, your customers, and you've got a script that goes through, not sort of line by line what to do in the interview, but you're able to make people feel comfortable, get them into the mode, the scenario that your problem is, that your solution is solving for. At that point, turning over control to the user for this interactive experience, like it's usually some sort of clickable prototype, could be some other experience. And if it's realistic enough, they will be able to give you some good feedback on whether that solution works for them, whether it's valuable to them. You can test some usability, but really in the beginning, as you're generating these ideas, I encourage you to talk to users sooner than you're probably comfortable. And the reason is that you can then iterate as you go to find that final solution. Because if you spend so much time getting it pixel perfect, you may be perfecting the wrong thing. So starting early, talking to users often, and then iterating through this process, as opposed to sort of only talking to stakeholders, iterating through their opinions. You want this customer input to make sure that when you get it out there, it does sort of hit your users well, and they do want to use it and they do adopt it. There's no reason to wait until all the engineering is done to talk to users. And also, there's no reason to sort of build an entire pixel perfect flow when pieces of that flow could be easily tested quickly.
What are some of the methods that you recommend that people do really early, sort of very early in the flow there?
Usually we're doing moderated testing. I like for my teams to hear how customers, hear how they're thinking, what they ask them to think out loud, get the reasons for why they're doing what they're doing in these prototypes. And often in an unmoderated test, it's a little bit more challenging for teams that are just starting at DIY research to create a prototype that works for an unmoderated situation. So in the beginning, it's really good to just start out with moderated testing of clickable prototypes. And most teams are creating clickable prototypes for engineering for stakeholders.
Got it. So it sounds like, playing it back to you, it sounds like what you're saying is really early, you might be doing some more generative research like you hear about in the mom test, which is very popular among product managers. But I think what you're saying is you're not talking about the solution yet. You're talking about their life, their problem, walking through specifics. And then at a later stage, once you have more of an idea what to build, then you're sort of talking about a prototype and how to do testing with a prototype. Is that right?
Yeah, these are two areas where I think product teams can DIY their research successfully. They're looking for more, I would say, structured feedback. In the beginning, where the interviews are more general, more about analyzing someone's life, more about analyzing their process. I don't see as many teams doing as much of this. Most teams have a long backlog and a long list of problems they're given by the business, which I think is fine. Like the business knows generally what the problems are. So it's really about figuring out which problem perhaps in a backlog to work on, and then going deeper on that problem.
Awesome. So we're in the prototyping stage. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about that and how you recommend running these prototype tests.
Most teams have a long backlog. The idea is pick an idea, pick a problem, use some of these sprint/design thinking techniques to do competitive research, to generate ideas, use some negative brainstorming techniques. You need to take the one idea you have and expand it. So you need to be expansive right now. I often do the crazy 8 sketching to be even more expansive, and I get everybody on the team to do it. So we want that cross-functional team involved: the engineer, designer, product manager, maybe you've got a data scientist. There are other folks sometimes on these teams. The reason you do this is you want diversity of opinion. You want more perspectives. We're not giving the designer a list of bullet points and say, hey, please come back with this prototype. We're going to go further into the design process, because really we're thinking about that user experience. And everyone on the team should take ownership and generate a point of view on the user experience, whether you're the engineer, the product manager, the designer. We're not going to be delegating this really important thing to one person. Partly because we want more input and innovation and diversity of opinion. And the other part is it's a lot of burden for the designer to sort of turn bullet points into an amazing idea. So through a sketching process, you do solution sketching, narrow it down to a couple ideas, never to one idea. There's no need to argue over one idea. As we on-ramp to the interview, hi, I'm Jim. We want to hear you think out loud. We'd like to show you some ideas, have you compare and contrast them. As we on-ramp to the interview, we also want to on-ramp into the concept. So my interviews have these two on-ramps, so to speak. And as part of that transition between welcome to the interview and the prototype, we want to collect a story to verify that we're talking to the right person. So does this person have experience with the problem? They're not going to have experience with the solution, right? But we need to make sure that they're in our target market, whether they're existing users, new users, and things like that. Yeah, this is always like a secondary check, because you've written a screener and a questionnaire. You've hopefully been able to dehydrate your criteria into something that you've seen a lot of good users come through and you'll be able to select. But you still want to collect that story, even if you've had somebody write it down in advance, because part of me wants to make sure I've got the right user on the call, and that they really understood what I was asking. And sometimes the conversation is easier to do that. And then they'll tell you more about the story, and I'll go into what's the frequency of the problem? What workarounds have you done to solve this problem? I'm not, as I tell my clients, my teams, don't gather too much personal information. Don't gather too much information outside of what you're looking for, because we don't actually want to collect this about people. We don't, I have a lot of healthcare clients. Don't ask about their other medical conditions. This is not stuff we want to be writing down about people. We want to stay super targeted to the research we're looking into. And often the prototypes are solving a particular problem in someone's life. We're never solving everything in everyone's life. So that's why the interview is collecting a story about the problem area we're looking at, not just general background.
Them to tell a story about something that they've been through related to your product, just to make sure, again, that they have the relevant experience before you're actually showing anything.
Right. This one gets them into the mindset of that last instance they had this problem, because you're going to take them back in time. And for users, for lightweight concepts, you can take them back in time 3 months, maybe a little bit more. if they have, I found with cancer patients, you can take them back a couple years. It's such an important event in their life. They remember the moment they heard the diagnosis, they remember their research, they remember all pieces of it. But most users, if you're talking about a fashion iPhone case versus a durability iPhone case, 3 months is going to be the half-life of your information. So if they start to recollect things and it gets kind of vague, I'm starting to think this person's going to be making stuff up. If it's very specific, I'm starting to think this is going to be a great interview. This person's going to channel this problem, and when they evaluate my solution to the problem, they're going to be in the right mindset. So it's part data point, part mindset setup.
And for the data point part of it, for the kind of validating, is this a good participant part? Are you trying to, how much do I need to like coax out of them to get good information? Or is it a binary, we do not have a truth teller here, we're going to end the session,
I think if they have the problem or they're eligible for the opportunity that I'm interested in, we'll go for it. I get long talkers who I have a hard time kind of reining them in, and they talk a lot. I get short talkers who give me 2-word answers. But if they have the problem, it's up to us as interviewers to hone our craft to be able to get feedback on the solution.
Great. So you've asked some initial questions about their experience. You have that gets them in the mindset of the last time they experienced the problem and also gives you some information about their relevance. Then how do you actually introduce the prototype? I'd love to hear more about that.
Usually I try not to say the word prototype. There's a lot of difference of opinion on this, but the less I say, the better. So I've learned that in moderated and unmoderated, users will basically pick up the last sentence and a half. We as researchers want to explain how this is a fake situation, this is a prototype, and the people are they're tuning it out. We find out a lot about usability during these tests. I think if you Google usability testing, you'll have like task completion rate, task completion time. These would be for interfaces and concepts that I would assume are sort of already tested, they're already proven to be valuable to people. I have no interest in a very speedy airline reservation process for flights I don't want to take, for information that's not useful on the screen. Like, I think people move too fast to usability testing, either assuming or just being afraid that their idea is wrong. And they'll say, well, I haven't confused anybody, it must be good. But then they launch it and no one uses it. So in this early stage where I want people to go through multiple options, it's more like, make sure people want this feature. They want this product. They want your company. Like, be vulnerable and really, and partly with the multiple options is they don't necessarily know which option they're supposed to choose. Is it Erin's option, Carol's option, Jim's option? And our job as an interviewer is to kind of make sure we don't expose our favorite option.
So you mentioned that they're doing these, you have task-based prompts about what would you do next, or maybe a more specific task. How are you, and they're moving through a flow. How are you assessing value as you're going through it?
Yeah, part of it is prototype creation. So my phrase is like design to learn. So we're not designing our solution yet. And the example I'll give is, let's say you had an analytics dashboard. It's very common to put multiple graphs on a dashboard so that you can, at a glance, see what's going on in your system. If you're testing something like this, when that screen loads, they don't know what they're looking at. You don't know what they're looking at and what they're reacting to. And of course, each of those analytics graphs is a lot of time and energy. So I pick analytics for a reason, because it's one of the hardest sort of products to create, because not only do you have to create a user interface and a backend, you have to create like a whole data store and collect all the data and whatnot. So each little graphic you show is the top of this iceberg of a tremendous amount of work. So discovery is perfect here. The key, though, is to take your, say, dashboard of a couple items and make those individual screens. You would never probably build it that way, but you're thinking, how do I get this reaction so I believe somebody, and how do I do this quickly? Well, I'll make one screen that's got a pie chart of this particular piece of data. But that may not be the best way to look at it. So as I'm dividing this one screen into multiple screens, I'm also thinking of what's a different way to show a pie chart. So I just show them the percentages of the numbers with the labels in like a list. Might be easier to understand. People hate pie charts. Bar charts. Well, actually, people don't love bar charts. People don't love charts at all.
I love charts.
You love charts? Oh,
Happy Pi Day, by the way. No, but I think I'm hearing a theme, Jim, in what you're talking about, right? Which is, a common truism of research, which is, research early, research often. And so we're really trying to de-risk building out a complex solution without having conviction. And we're doing that all the way through the process. So, earlier you were talking about kind of user interviews and really making sure we have an understanding of the problem, a rough idea of some possible solutions. When we're talking about prototype testing and concept testing, we're talking about are we going in the right direction with a high level solution? And you're saying, in the analytics case, don't show them the final solution of the dashboard with all of these pieces in it. We're not there yet. Like, we'll get there. Better now to think about components, right? And get those components right so that the right components end up in that final dashboard. Is that kind of what you're saying in that example?
exactly. And when some of these components are shown, it could be that there's an even more out of the box solution for it. So in one of these situations, I worked for an entrepreneur who just wanted sales data texted to that person 6 times a day. They didn't want to log into a dashboard. So when you present hypotheses one at a time, it allows you to think about the multiple options and allows you to get a better feedback sort of situation going with the user. Whereas the whole screen is a little bit overwhelming of items. It's also can be misleading in terms of what they're reacting to. And once you have to start asking the question, were you reacting to that third graphic and tell me more about that, then you're talking. And now you're starting to lead something and you might just keep talking. So this also allows you to not talk as much because they're just going to react. And that reaction is the gold of our interviews. The, oh, wow, the sort of coal of the interviews would be, oh, that's interesting. I like that. These are kind of the lies users tell us when we want people to like things.
But let's talk more about that. So you have your prototype. It has a series of screens and a smaller concept that you might be testing on each of the screens. And you're listening for reactions. What are some things that you look for? Say more about some things that you look for to understand that something is really valuable or maybe not resonating as much.
Yeah, so here's when it's really important to have the video on of the person you're interviewing, because you're using your eyes to see reactions and you're using your eye because you got the video and you have their screen. You're using your eyes to see where they're clicking because they might be clicking on things that aren't clickable. And then you're listening for that kind of emotional reaction to, oh, wow. Oh, interesting. What's interesting about that? Get off your script and get on to what the user's reacting to. And that's why once the prototype comes into play, my interview script is much less about specific questions and more about just a list of hypotheses that by the time I'm done with the screen or the interview, I want to have answered.
You mentioned hypotheses and questions. What are some examples of, hypotheses or questions you might jot down heading into a test like this?
I usually try to make it a point of view. So user wants automatically suggested diagnosis codes. User wants suggestions from past patients. User wants this types of things. Because I want to be disproven and I want to be clear that I am taking a point of view. Again, I'm not trying to show that to the users, but we definitely have an opinion as to everybody's got an opinion about where it's supposed to go. But if you have a couple different options that service that hypothesis. So usually there's one hypothesis for the experiment, like users want help, doctors want help with diagnosis codes. It could be they don't want help, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be open to that initial hypothesis. And then everything I put into a prototype, everything my teams put in, I'm asking like, is this something you're testing? Yes or no? If you're not testing it, stop building it. Stop wasting the time on building like you're trying to use the design system. Like we will definitely use the design system. Nothing launches without the design system. But now let's just get the idea out there because there is no component for this. So stop designing the design system component for something people may not want.
And is there a set number of people that you usually recommend kind of talking to for a test like this? Or how do you think about recruiting the right folks to get the right signal?
So there are some things that are not that risky that you really shouldn't talk to people about. Like people think I'll sometimes take the discovery and the interviewing concept too far. If there's something you feel confident about and there's no risk, then build it. if there's some risk, and the risk would be we're going to spend a couple months of a couple engineers' time, and we're not really sure exactly what the solution is. We know about the problem, but it'd be nice to know more before we spent this time. That's when I'm starting to think, okay, we're going to talk to at least 5 users in the beginning. And I say 5 just because when you make sure you recruit 6 or 7, because you want 5 to show up within a time frame. If your users come through in like 2 or 3 weeks, then it kind of elongates the analysis and you're not going to hit your sprint deadlines. So recruit such that you yield 5 interviews. And this initial 5 interviews will tell you, did you get the right target market? So you may have to change your screeners. You may have realized you actually got the screener right, but your mind's eye about these users was wrong. There's so many things you learn about your users when you start talking to them. Then you could learn a lot about the prototypes as you go through. And I'm okay with teams refining the prototypes as they go through your interviews. There's no need to show a really bad idea that you know is bad after a couple people say it's bad. 5 people is not going to prove anything over 2 people because this is still 5 people. So I recommend 5 in the beginning. And then as you refine a concept, probably 3, 3, 3. So about 14 or 15 users and an idea that takes a couple months for a couple engineers. If you're a startup and your whole company is based on this idea, we might be going 20, 30, 40 users to refine through the various parts of the idea before you spend a couple $100,000 building it.
Before we jump into our rapid fire section, you did mention that one common mistake you see of product managers is asking, what do you see? Are there other common mistakes that you see with especially product managers who are new to research, doing prototypes?
Yeah, they want to please their users. They want to be like the smart person. And it's a symptom of the hiring of the job. Like as a product person, you're supposed to be a leader. You're supposed to know what you're doing. And then somehow in this environment, you're supposed to turn it all off and be dumb. The user researcher often is not necessarily testing material in their product. They might be assigned to multiple products. They might have this benefit of detachment. Product teams don't. And so you have to practice this detachment, practice being dumb, practice not answering questions, and practice not pleasing your user, which is why the name of your podcast is the best, Awkward Silences. And this is a practiced and a learned skill to sit there and just let it be quiet.
Let's jump into that rapid fire section that Carol mentioned. So I think I know the answer to your favorite research method, maybe, because we've been talking about it, but what is your favorite research interview question?
I love, tell me about a time when, because it gets them in the mindset. You collect that data point, you verify that relevancy of this person to your research. And then at the end, there's this particular question that served me well, which was outside of this thing we talked about today. What's the most important problem your business is dealing with? A couple of years ago, it was hiring. Many years ago before that, it was the growth of traffic and purchasing on mobile devices. And if I didn't ask this question, I just wouldn't have known these things. And these are growth and expansion areas for your product.
Great. Love this. What are 1 to 2 or 2, 3 resources you recommend most to others, books or otherwise?
Certainly the Mom Test book. I think it's a tight, very small book that once you're done reading it, there are specific techniques and there's a general halo effect of like, oh, I shouldn't be doing a couple things.
Where can folks find you? Where do you hang out on the interwebs?
My website, productdiscoverygroup.com. All my articles are there. The way to reach me is there. I just launched an online course there. So it's a great resource.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.